Thanks for being here tonight, Ben, and thank you in general for all the work you do to promote open debate and intellectual honesty and general decency when dealing with people with whom one might disagree.
So far, I like your question. Continue.
Yeah, having said that, I do have some rather fundamental points of disagreement with you, and I was hoping we could hash one of them out. And this is particularly about forcible redistribution of wealth. So it's not about, say, taxation where there's some benefit redounding to me, but forcible redistribution of wealth where I see no benefit. And you've said in the past that this is morally wrong, and you've likened it to theft.
Yes.
And I'd like to argue,
I think that it's theft, yeah.
I'd like to argue that, in fact, it might be morally right, and more than that, it might be morally incumbent upon us to engage in some amount of forcible redistribution of wealth. Now, I know for a fact that you've heard of John Rawls, and
yes.
so I take it you're familiar with his theory of justice.
I think it's completely wrong and terrible.
Right.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about sort of a slightly weaker version of Rawls' theory of justice. I think he argues for a little bit too strong of a point, but maybe you'll let me make a slightly Rawlsian argument. Okay. So imagine all of us have yet to be born into society. Now, we look over the society, and we don't know whether we're going to be born rich or poor, and that could be in terms of money, intelligence, physical well-being, you name it, status, what have you. So we face this extremely risky proposition of whether we're going to be rich or poor, and seeing that there's a very sizable chance of being put at a significant disadvantage or even just having a less enjoyable life, perhaps. Well, what do? We do the only reasonable thing, and we go to Policy Genius, and we buy a policy to insure ourselves. Well, not exactly. They don't sell this one, but we do the next best thing, which is we get together and we create a contract that says each of us who is born sufficiently rich will pay a certain amount of their wealth so that those of us who are born sufficiently poor
Yeah, I mean, this isn't really a quasi-Rawlsian argument. This is just a straight Rawlsian argument, right? I mean, this is...
I mean, so he advocates for
I mean,
more
you're
or less
dropping
total
the Rawlsian veil of
equality.
ignorance, and we're behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance. You
He
don't know which side you're on
advocates
yet.
more or less for total equalization of the distribution, but I'm just saying some amount of redistribution.
Right.
So I would say all of us know that this is the reasonable thing to do is to sign this contract to insure ourselves, so we all sign the contract. So once we're born into society...
Don't assume my consent.
Isn't... Well, we can argue about that, but... Once we're all born into society, wouldn't it be morally incumbent upon us to enforce the contract that we all signed?
Well, you just said, well, I mean, you made an enormous leap there. First of all, you assume my consent to a contract that I've signed when I haven't been born, and then you say that it has to be enforced because I signed it before I was born.
So the problem I have with this argument is you could levy the exact same argument against someone like John Locke's social contract, where the idea is we're assuming that everyone in society agreed to the Lockean social contract, where we give up certain rights, say my right to commit violence against somebody else, or enslave them or what have you, to protect our rights. Now, you could just as well argue that maybe there's someone who's, you know, really loves the risky lifestyle where they get to go around and, you know, attack others and be attacked at their own risk, and they didn't want to sign the contract, and they don't want to live under the jurisdiction of the government of the United States.
And then they can leave. Right, and then they can leave. Right?
I suppose they could leave, but it's often not so simple because you can't necessarily find a place in the world that isn't subject to some form of government like this. Well, so what I'm saying is, I think it's reasonable.
Because I think the fundamental Lockean bargain is that you actually aren't. The difference between Locke and Hobbes is that Hobbes suggests you give up all your rights when you move into a governmental system. Locke suggests you basically give up none of your rights. You're just delegating the enforcement of your rights to a government. So that is a just bargain. That's exactly the kind of taxation argument I was making before. Right? That what you're giving up is what you're receiving back. You're giving up the power to enforce those rights to an entity that guarantees the enforcement of those rights. So it's not the same kind of bargain that you're talking about where something is being taken away from me or prospectively taken away from me that I will never see again, right? That will be gone. So it actually reduces back to the taxation question that I argued a little bit earlier.
If I may.
Sure.
So among the natural rights that John Locke would list is the right to property, and among that, as you mentioned, is the right to alienate your labor and form consensual agreements.
Yes.
And the idea would be that all of us would form this agreement consensually. So how is it
I know, but you can't, this is my problem. You and John Rawls, you keep assuming my consent to a system I do not consent to. I do not believe in the Rawlsian veil of ignorance. I don't believe that behind the only thing I agree to behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance is that I don't want anyone infringing my individual rights. Right? To a certain extent, every system of justice is based on a Rawlsian veil of ignorance, in the sense that you don't know where you're going to end up in society, so what do you think the minimum should be the guarantee? So I think the minimum guarantee should be that I have a right to do all these things that I would have a right to do in the state of nature. I don't think the minimum guarantee is I get to take stuff from you. I don't think the minimum guarantee is even to a basic standard of living. Right? I think that the minimum guarantee is I have the right to go and pursue all of these things on my own. I think that duties and rights are not quite the same thing. They're sort of the flip side of the coin. So what I would argue is that we as good people I think the stronger argument for redistributionism is not a rights argument that I have a right to your property. The stronger argument for redistributionism is that I have a good person have a duty to give you something, right? That is a stronger argument. That's frankly a more religiously based argument, but it's an argument for private charity more than it is an argument for government interventionism in which they dictate what your duty is. So the problem that I have with the entire Rawlsian flavor of this is that he's assuming that we have a blank slate of humanity to work with. Here's the truth. We can redistribute the wealth all we want. And you know what? If we are still able to alienate our labor and we have different natural abilities and qualities, the economic redistributionism will fail within 10 years. Okay, the Rawlsian redistribution of wealth does not work in a free system in which there are natural differences between human beings. And violating people's rights in order to do that, shaving someone down to size, in order to do that gets rid of not only the dynamism in the economy, but all of the benefits that we have by being different. Right? The beauty of a free market is that we don't all have to be same widgets. We don't have to be homogenous widgets who all earn the same and all have the same IQ and all act the same and all make the same choices. The beauty of a free market is that the guy with an IQ 30 points lower than mine who works as a plumber, by the way, still be super smart, is that you'll get it, wait for it, is that when he becomes a plumber and wants to alienate his labor, I don't have to have his skill set, right? The natural diversity of human beings is what causes the free market to thrive and flourish. The Rawlsian argument is that there should basically be no natural diversity of human beings, that we should try and rip those away as fast as possible because those are unjust no matter what. Like if Rawls were God, Rawls would just make everybody have 100 IQ and earn the same amount of money because that would be the Rawlsian veil of ignorance taken to its ultimate extreme, right? Because you don't know who you're going to be. Well, you're going to be this person, and this person is everyone, right? And that is inherently immoral, wrong, non-flourishing, ineffective, all of the thesaurus terms for bad I can come up with.
That's exactly where I think Rawls goes wrong, is that he assumes this sort of perfect risk aversion where everyone wouldn't want even a tiny bit of inequality in the distribution.
But what I'm saying is that I don't think anyone should be able to dictate to anyone else what their risk aversion should be. So I want to make sure that we get more questions, but this is a good exchange, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.